Nothing is being left back. We've seen... Look out! Oh, an elbow drop! Oh, he's got him down. Is this it?
1, 2, 3. The WWE franchise has failed to really get off the ground ever since 2K Games got a hold of the license, and in recent years, it feels like it's progressively just gotten worse with each new game. And that downward trajectory has sadly continued this year. Longtime series developers Ukes jumped ship this year as they ended their partnership with 2K and went off to work on their own wrestling game, but new developers Visual Concepts of NBA 2K fame haven't been able to turn things around. In fact, WWE 2K20 is the lowest point for a series that's seen no shortage of low points. WWE 2K20 takes a step back in the areas where its predecessor made at least some improvements, with both My Career and Showcase being disappointments after last year's decent showings. But even in the more fundamental areas, the game fails to do the bare minimum. The most egregious of its flaws arises in its gameplay, which is the worst that it's ever been in the series. Beyond modified controls, which admittedly do work pretty well, rather than making improvements upon last year's game, much of the mechanics and systems have been brought over as is. The targeting system is still something of a mess, and it makes throwing even the simplest of kicks and punches an exercise in and of itself, while the game's over-reliance on reversals hasn't changed one bit. The necessity to perfectly time reversals every time hits from opponents come in is not only annoying, it also gets repetitive very quickly. The lack of a dodge move or a block in a fighting game still baffles me. What's worse is that WWE 2K20 not only doesn't make improvements, it actively makes the fighting worse because of a spate of issues. The biggest of these is the AI, which can be dumb as a bag of rocks at the worst of times, but even other issues like hit detection or a smattering of bugs make even the simplest moment-to-moment stuff not work, more often than not. And that smattering of bugs is in fact the second biggest issue with the games, if not tied for the biggest. WWE 2K20 is in a sorry state. It's surprising that this is a game that 2K Games deemed to be in a state worthy of launch. Undoubtedly, there's going to be countless montages of hilarious glitches going around the internet over the next few months, and if you do decide to play the game for yourself, chances are that you're going to run into many of these bugs yourself. From clipping characters to invisible characters in cutscenes, from ugly visual glitches to harsh frame rate drops, from commentators talking about things that have nothing to do with what's going on in the ring, to the crashes. Oh man, so many crashes. From booting me out of modes to flat out forcing me to restart the game, I've encountered crashes in WWE 2K20 on multiple occasions. Outside of the fundamentals and moving into modes, WWE 2K20 falters with My Career as well. Last year's game set down a decent foundation with its own career mode, that at least had a functional story, solid acting, and an interesting framework. It was something that could be taken into interesting directions with successive iterations, and while that's still possible in future installments, it really hasn't happened in 2K20's My Career. The framework the game uses for the career is, to be fair, pretty interesting. You play as Red and Trey, climbing the men's and women's wrestling ladders with the two of those, but it happens in a series of flashbacks of sorts, as the two of them reminisce about their careers and the paths they took. Certainly it's an interesting way to frame a narrative, and does enough to set it apart from last year's story. When 2K20's My Career started out, I thought it could actually be a pretty interesting experience. I was ready to like it, but I didn't. The writing is the biggest issue of all. This being a WWE game, you expect some level of cheesiness and over-the-top stuff. Hell, you even want it. Then there's plenty of it in here, but it can at times get so corny that it almost gets on your nerves. The leading characters are immensely unlikable, and the banter between them is never really sold very well, while the script's attempts at humor just come across as grating and facile. The story's interesting framework isn't really made proper use of either, and it just ends up feeling like you're going through the motions. Worse still, the actual gameplay of the career mode hasn't seen any improvements either. WWE 2K19 drew criticism for its crippled progression and customization mechanics, and those issues have been brought over into its successor as is. Customization's still dependent on in-game currency, and it's still ridiculously grindy and unrewarding. But that's still only cosmetic, and it would be easier to forgive if the actual mechanical progression wasn't at least as grindy, which it totally is. Upgrading your characters is a slow, crawling affair, and you never really feel like you're making any meaningful progress. It's all enough to combine together and make you feel just really detached from the entire experience. If you're not really being rewarded properly for any progress you make in your career, why would you ever be invested in any of it? I certainly wasn't. Showcase mode makes a return as well after having made an impressive debut, at least conceptually, in the last year's game. This year, the focus is on the 4 horsewomen, namely Sasha Banks, Charlotte Bayley, and Becky Lynch, and undoubtedly, it's great to see the women's revolution of WWE being represented and getting its time in the spotlight. The objective-based gameplay of Showcase, mixed with the interview and real footage from historic moments and matches, is still intact, and for fans of WWE, there's at least some enjoyment to be had here. There are issues there as well, though. The objectives in Showcase mode can be weirdly specific at times, and the game doesn't always do a very good job of communicating them. More importantly though, the biggest issue boils down to the one thing that acts to the detriment of WWE 2K20 in every area, whether that's Showcase or my career, and that's that the game is mechanically imperfect, just to put it mildly, and it just doesn't work as it should a lot of the time. When the fighting itself isn't fun or solid, all the interesting framework, real footage, and objectives in the world can't salvage the experience. WWE 2K20 is rotten on the inside and broken at its core. It fails at doing many fundamental things properly, which actively take away from the experience. And then there's the fact that it doesn't improve upon any of the ideas of its predecessor, and in some cases it actually takes them a step back. And the fact that it's an absolute technical mess riddled with bugs and plagued by bland subpar visuals. Even for hardcore WWE fans, this one is hard to recommend. The best all of us can do is wait for a year and hope that Visual Concepts and 2K somehow manage to bring this franchise back from the dead, Undertaker style. And that wraps it up. If you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing to our channel. We upload new videos daily. Also, don't forget to switch on the bell notification icon, that way you don't miss out on any of our videos.